Hello, this is a presentation of the Susquehanna County Historical Society and Free Library Association. My name is Bonnie Escavage, Research Assistant at the Historical Society, and this event is hosted by the Society. Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania has been the home of many men and women who have made service to the community a priority in their lives. Today, we're going to celebrate the lives of two Black residents, Reverend Jermaine Loguen and the Honorable Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright, and their contributions to the people of Susquehanna County and nationally. We can think of no one better to discuss these men than our speakers today. Sherman and Cindy Wooden are President and Secretary, respectively, of the Center for Anti-Slavery Studies here in Montrose, Pennsylvania. They've spent decades discovering the lives of the Black community and have brought the events of their lives to light. Sherman and Cindy, thank you for being with us today. Sherman and Cindy, I'm going to ask you then to take over the interview section of this. So I'm going to switch the camera over to you and tell us a little bit about these two fascinating men.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We are very pleased to be able to help in this presentation. There are many subjects on which we might speak, but as Sister Bonnie said, we are very encouraged to talk about the Reverend Jermaine Loguen and the judge. They're both two men of color, both born in February, very appropriate for this presentation. One born in slavery, the other in freedom, of different generations. One born about 1810, one born in 1840. They both gained prominence in our area. Both assisted members of their race to reach greater potential, and both had a wider impact on the future of America than most of us will ever realize personally. We know these men as the Reverend Jermaine Wesley Loguen and the Honorable Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright, whose portrait we have here behind us. Let's first talk about Reverend Jermaine Loguen. He was born Jarm Logue, and what was his early life like?
He was born on February 5th in 1810 or in 1813, 16 miles northeast of Nashville, Tennessee. His mother's name was Cherry, born Jan McCoy in Ohio, kidnapped and sold south to John and Eleanor Logue in Tennessee. The father, Dave Logue, youngest of the three sons of the Logues. Jermaine's siblings were Marie, Ann, Jane, and two brothers. The main product of the Logue farm was whiskey, which was used excessively by the three Logue brothers. What were some of the common practices in the 1800s?
As you mentioned, many of the plantations or farms in Tennessee, where they grew a lot of corn, the excess was marketed as whiskey in order to be a cash crop. Also, a common practice were that slave women were often taken as mistresses by a master or a son of a master. One of the byproducts would be free labor for the farm or plantation, or they would sell them to be a cash crop. After David Logue married, Cherry and the children were sold to his brother Manasseh. And also another common practice was that slaves were sometimes hired out to neighbors to make more money for the master, while the slave might actually receive a little for his service, and sometimes accumulating enough in order to buy his own freedom or that of another. What effect did these common practices have on Jermaine?
Fortunately for Jermaine, he was hired out to a kind neighbor for 3 years who treated him like one of the family. He ate with the family. He was not beaten. He built his own cabin. He worked without an overseer, conversed on many topics, was engaged as an equal. Plus, the family was secretly members of the anti-slavery. When Jermaine returned to the Logue plantation, he began planning his escape with two other slaves, John Fernie and Jerry Wilkes. What preparation went into their escape?
First of all, they had made some contacts with other folks to know something about where they might be going, the lay of the land, and being pointed toward the Ohio River. One of them was a small boy who had moved from Illinois to Tennessee, not far from the Logue plantation, who was age 10. So they didn't get too much information that way. They also knew they would need cash. And so Germain sold a barrel of whiskey in order to gain that cash. They used that to buy guns and also to get forged passes. They kept the master's horses in good condition, with grooming them and feeding them. And they planned to stay at taverns, hotels, and wealthy white homes. And so therefore they would need cash to pay for their lodging. They decided to head for Illinois, a free state, and they planned to leave on Christmas Eve. Jerry Wills decided to stay with his family instead of escaping. At that point, John Logue changed his name to Jermaine Logan. Obviously, the escape was successful, or we might not have heard about him later. Were there any obstacles on the way?
Well, John Fournier and Jermaine Logan escaped on Christmas Eve, riding their master's horses. At the Ohio River, an African-American advised them not to dally in the free state of Illinois or Indiana. People would rather help fugitives pass through and help them free persons who may stay. Agents from Ohio to the Canadian border were usually people of color. Exception was Quakers and Native Americans. In Detroit, John's horse and saddle was stolen. Jermaine only had 50 cents in his pocket and an old nag in place of his master's horse. John went back to reclaim his possessions. That was the last Jermaine ever saw him. In Canada, Jermaine found work, cutting wood and splitting rails. He was only 22. Determined to obtain education, he attended the Sunday school programs available. With such a late start in education, how did he become a minister?
Well, through hard work and good study. In 1837, he moved to Rochester, New York, where he worked in a fancy hotel in order to gain some money. At this point, he made a lifelong friend of a man named Amias Rogers, who happened to be a student at Oneida Institute in New York State. It was the custom for the students to be at the Institute for about 8 months out of the year, 8 or 9 months out of the year, and then be able to work the remaining months of the year. And so that's what happened over the winter holidays. They were able to work. And Amias Rogers was acting as a teacher in the Rochester area. He also decided that Jermaine offered enough promise that he would tutor him in order to be accepted at Oneida Institute. So that's what they did. Oneida Institute operated from 1827 to 1844. It was mainly a work-study program where the students would work in the fields to help support the institute and themselves and reduce the tuition. It closed in 1844 mainly because the director then, who was Reverend Beriah Green, was emphasizing developing Black theologians and supporting the anti-slavery cause. This was not exactly in favor of the major shareholders, apparently. In 1839, on school break, Jermaine taught school in Utica, New York, and decided not to complete his last year at Oneida. In 1840, he married Caroline Storham and began earning a regular living, whatever that might have been, but also developed a burning desire to make changes for his race. He viewed education as the equalizer in life and began encouraging African Americans to seek education in order to improve their chances in life. In 1841, he joined the AME Zion Church. He became licensed to preach and began organizing schools for African Americans. His church assignment was Syracuse from 1841 to 1843, and this became the Logan's permanent residence. No matter where else they might have to move, that was their home they came back to. In 1843, he was privileged to attend the National Convention for African Americans in Buffalo, New York. He also became ordained as a deacon that year and could administer the sacraments. His church assignment was Bath from 1843 to 1846. In 1845, he was a delegate to the third conference of the AME Zion Church in Hartford, Connecticut. 1846 to 1848, his church assignment changed again to Ithaca, and this is where he began his very serious work on the Underground Railroad, networking with other ministers across the state to move the passengers along the line. In 1848 to 1850, his church assignment was back in Syracuse and also Troy, New York. But in 1850, with the passage of the final fugitive slave law, which tightened all the previous laws and allowed bounty hunters to seek fugitives wherever they could find them. It also forbade integrated education. And many of those who were fugitives and well sought after, such as Harriet Tubman, decided they would go back to Canada for a time to make sure that they escaped capture. It was at this time that Germain noted that on a plantation, the slave was the one with the skills, but once he regained his freedom, he was not permitted to use those skills in order to earn a living. How did the Reverend become known as the Underground Railroad King of New York?
Well, from 1852 to 1855, he returned to Syracuse in much activities on the Underground Railroad. He attended the National Commission of African Americans in Rochester, further increased his motivation to work for his fellow man. From 1856 to 1859, he resigned as a minister to work full-time with the Underground Railroad activities. Principal sort of aid support came from the Ladies' Aid Society. His project needed clothing, shelter, transportation, medicine, donations from all of these, plus his own family expenses. In 1859, at the Berry Street AME Zion Church was completed, Loguen returned to ministry. In 1860, the AME Zion Church had a conference in Montrose, Pennsylvania. Loguen was declared USRR King of New York, which is the Underground Railroad King of New York, by the Weekly African American Journal, which was supported by the AME Zion Church. How is Reverend Loguen tied to Montrose?
As it was mentioned, he returned to the ministry in 1859. And was his church assignment from 1861 to 1864 was the Berry Street Church, AME Zion Church in Montrose. He shared that pastorage with the AME Zion Trinity Church in Binghamton, New York. 1863, with the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation and the beginnings of recruitment for U.S. colored troops, Reverend Germain Loguen started recruiting for the U.S. colored troops. In fact, one of the troops that was recruited was called Logan's Guards. They were mostly from Binghamton, New York. And it would seem likely that many of the 33 colored men from Susquehanna County who enlisted in the U.S. colored troops were probably encouraged to do so by the pastor of the AME Zion Church, Reverend Germain Loguen. He was about age 50 at this point. After the war, what did the Reverend do?
Loguen decided he returned to his home state of Tennessee to establish schools and churches. As he had once advocated for integrated schools in the North, he now advocated for segregated schools in the South, hoping for an equal amount of resources to improve educational opportunities for African Americans. He raised funds in the North to enhance his work in the South and recruited teachers. He noted that the white directed schools and the white educators were interested in producing docile workers, not for sharing power or education for free inquiry. In 1868, he was elected bishop of the AME Zion Church, assigned to the 5th District, which included the Allegheny in the Kentucky Conference. In 1870, he was reassigned to the 2nd District, which included Genesee and the Philadelphia Baltimore conferences. In 1872, he was assigned to do the mission work on the Pacific Coast, but TB took his life while healing at Saratoga Springs, New York at the age of 62. Did he have any children?
Yes, he had at least 5. One was Helen Amelia Loguen. She became a teacher in the Hawley Street School for African Americans in Binghamton, New York, and married Lewis Douglas, Frederick Douglass's son, after the war in 1864. Unfortunately, they had no children. Sarah Loguen was a second daughter. She was one of the first female doctors who graduated from Syracuse University Medical School in 1876. Then she interned at Women's Hospital in Philadelphia. She became a physician in Syracuse, Washington, D.C., and Santo Domingo, from which her husband was from. He was a pharmacist there. Their daughter was Gregoria Alejandra Frazier. She majored in music at the Fine Arts College of Syracuse University. She established a school of music in Baltimore, Maryland, was a concert pianist, and taught at Washington Conservatory of Music, Washington, D.C. A son, Jarrett Smith Loguen, became a portrait painter. He married Louisa Matthews, who became the first female embalmer in Syracuse. They had a son, James Loguen, who was an artist, and he married Elizabeth Howard, a teacher. Mary Catherine Loguen was another daughter. She married James Cromwell in 1877. They had 2 children, Germaine Logan Cromwell, who became an artist, and Amelia Marinda Cromwell, who taught at Tuskegee Institute. Cora Juliet Logan was another daughter who married Eugene Foster, a teacher. Their son, Leon Logan Foster, became a photographer and worked for the Chicago Defender for a time. This is Reverend Jermaine Logan, born in slavery, gained prominence in New York and Pennsylvania, assisted members of his race in reaching greater potential, and had a wide impact on the future of African Americans. Let us turn now to the Honorable Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright. What was Jonathan's early life like?
Born February the 11th in 1840 in Pennsylvania or Ohio, the census record disagreed. His parents were Samuel and Jane Wright. In 1850, the family moved to Springfield, Pennsylvania as a farmers. In 1853, he petitioned the Lynn Presbyterian Church for membership and was accepted at the age 13 in Springfield, Pennsylvania. That would happen. Petitioning a church for a pretty precocious for a 13-year-old, let alone a young man of color in the 1850s. What else was unusual?
Well, he was educated locally, the biography said, in district schools, and mentored at age 15 by a Dr. William Pride, who had been a missionary to the Choctaw Indians in Missouri. Dr. Pride was also a member of the Lynn Presbyterian Church. He particularly mentored him so that he could enter the Lancasterian Academy in Ithaca, New York in 1858 at age 18. And 2 years later, one source indicates 2 years later, he was back in the Susquehanna County area. One source indicated he taught school in Montrose. We're not sure which school exactly. The census record indicates he worked as a farm laborer, and local lore says he worked as a shoeshine while studying in Montrose. But in 1862, he was reading law with Bentley, Fitch, and Bentley in Montrose, Pennsylvania. And 2 years later, he moved to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and read law with Judge O. Collins and taught school there. Would Jonathan have crossed paths with Reverend Jermaine Logan?
Quite likely. Reverend Logan pastored the AME Zion Church in Montrose from 1861 to 1864, the time period when Jonathan returned to Montrose from the Lascarian Institute and began reading law in Montrose. According to Deborah Edelman's research, Mr. J.J. Wright was to deliver a speech at the Zion Church on January 1st, 1864, called the Jubilee, probably celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation first anniversary. Also in 1864, he attended the first National Convention in Syracuse, called by Frederick Douglass. Remember that Syracuse was the permanent home of Reverend Logan. Also in 1864, he applied for the Pennsylvania bar and was refused due to his race at the age of 24. What was his response following his refusal?
Apparently, he was not deterred too much by his motivation to go forward. In fact, he became very involved in politics. In 1865, he spoke at the Pennsylvania State Equal Rights Convention for Colored People. This was held in Harrisburg, February 8th to the 10th, one day before his 25th birthday. On April 3rd of that year, he spoke on the steps of the Montrose Courthouse, speaking on the rights of men. This speech was recorded in the Independent, of which we have a reproduced copy here. I quote from that speech. "We ask you now to be true to yourselves and to posterity. 3 times you have paid the price of a free country. Let it not again revert to slavery and barbarism. By making this country free, you will not only be just to yourselves, but you will be generous to the South. Instead of being politically a blot upon the nation's honor and practically a slave pen as it has been, the giant impetus of free labor will make it the garden of this continent. In this, you will have the strongest guarantee of your country's future peace and greatness. A nation free will be a nation united. The prayers of 4 millions of people will thank you for deliverance from bondage, while the bond of liberty will unite North, South, East, and West in one common brotherhood around the altar of our country's liberty. Later that month, in April, he joined the American Missionary Association and was sent to South Carolina, Beaufort County and Parris Island in particular. There he helped organize and teach in the regimental schools for newly freed Black soldiers. He taught Sabbath schools, night school, and gave legal advice to the newly freed. 1865 saw the end of the Civil War. What happened after that?
As of January 1st, 1866, he was a delegate from the Beaufort County to the first organized political gathering of Black citizens of South Carolina, the Colored People Convention. Spoke to 5,000 people at the age of 26. August 13, 1866, he was admitted to the Pennsylvania bar of Susquehanna County, the first Black admitted to the bar in Pennsylvania. How was J.J. Wright, attorney, involved in Reconstruction?
In January of 1867, he returned to South Carolina as an attorney with the Freedmen's Bureau. This was overseen by the General Oliver Howard, who was also the founder of Howard University, Washington, D.C. In July of that year, he spoke at the first South Carolina Union Republican Party. We have to remember that the Republican Party then was the party of Lincoln and not the Republican Party of today. And the Democratic Party then was the party of the Confederacy. In January of 1868, he was elected as a delegate to the South Carolina Constitutional Convention. This concentrated on funding for public education and homestead exemption. He served on the Judicial Committee for the convention and spoke 80 times. In April of 1868, he was nominated for Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. This he lost, but was selected as the Republican candidate for the Senate, which seat he won. He spoke perhaps more than any other senator, age 28. 2 years later, in February 1870, he was selected to complete a term as Supreme Court Justice of South Carolina. And then in December of that year, he was officially elected for a 6-year term. This was the highest position held by a colored man in the United States of America, and it was reported all over the nation. He was 30 years old. He authored some 90 decisions, none overturned since, and served 7 years. Why didn't he serve longer on the South Carolina Supreme Court?
Well, the Honorable Judge Jonathan Wright, along with the rest of the elected men of color, was ousted following the 1876 presidential election. This was called the Red Shirt Campaign in South Carolina and the beginning of the Jim Crow period throughout the South. It was filled with intimidation, loss of voting rights and other privileges, and lynchings. Southern white Democrats were bent on retaking control over the state and the local elections. This period featured voter intimidation of 60% Black majority using violence, fraud, ballot box stuffing. 300 rifle clubs assaulted the political rights of Blacks and attacked those attempting to exercise their voting rights, including seated senators and representatives. Murder charges were brought against 80 whites whose bail was paid by the Democratic officers. November 1876, the Board of Canvassers, Lincoln Republicans, threw out the electoral votes, 2 counts for fraud. Democrats pushed for overturning the results of the count and jailed the Board of Canvassers. Armed insurrectionists surrounded the State House guarded by federal troops. Democrats began a tax boycott to reduce the state offers by persuading banks to support and pay only the Democratic legislators. This hastened the overturn of the gubernatorial election, awarding the governorship to the Democrat Hampton and assigning electoral college votes to Hayes. March 1877, Hayes was sworn in as president. Hayes met with Wright and delegation of blacks from South Carolina, then ordered the removal of all federal troops from South Carolina. This ushered in the resurgence of white supremacy. June 6, 1877, Judge Wright was impeached for drunkenness, along with other blacks being ousted from office on equally fraudulent charges. Rather than submit to a trial by the South Carolina Senate, he resigned effectively December 1st, 1877, at the age of 37. What does one do after serving at that level?
In 1878, he began touring the North, raising funds for Black Sunday schools. Then at the end of the 1878 and 1879, he developed the law department at Claflin College, South Carolina, an all-Black college, where he taught law. And he started private law practice in Charleston, South Carolina. Unfortunately, increasing health problems due to tuberculosis rendered him an invalid by late 1884 at the age of 44. Former students were those who attended him. He died February 17, 1885, just 6 days past his 45th birthday. How is the Honorable Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright remembered?
For over 100 years, he wasn't. February 20th, 1897, the South Carolina Supreme Court held a formal ceremony for his courtroom in honor of Justice Wright. 1998, a conference was named the Jonathan Jasper Wright in the early African-American bar in South Carolina. His portrait was unveiled at the University of South Carolina School of Law, and an annual award was renamed the Jonathan Jasper Wright Award. February 11th, 1999, his birthday anniversary, the first Jonathan Wright Day, was recognized in Susquehanna County Courthouse with the presentation of his portrait to the county by the Center for Anti-Slavery Studies. September 13th, 2001, unveiled the Pennsylvania historical marker in Springfield, Pennsylvania, memorializing the Honorable Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright. To quote from the South Carolina ceremony honoring the judge, "The life of Jonathan Jasper Wright offers a striking example of the talent lost to the state, to the region, and nation by suppressing the educational opportunities and political rights of Black citizens. Wright's rediscover, now a century following his death, offers the hope that his dream be realized, that we shall know no north, no east, nor south, nor west, nor white, nor colored, nor Democrat, nor Republican, but choose men because of their intrinsic value and their honesty and integrity." The Honorable Jonathan Jasper Wright, born free of humble farmers, gained prominence in Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania, assisted members of his race in reaching greater potential, had a wide impact on the future of African Americans.
We thank you very much for your interest and attention, and we trust you have learned something new about two people who have been connected with Montrose and Susquehanna County. And we will turn this back to Ms. Bonnie.
Thank you very much. I have to admit that I did not know the extent of the work that these men and the struggles that they overcame. These lives are fascinating. I was particularly touched with the fact that it was a barrel of whiskey. That's so ironic that Jermaine Loguen gained his freedom with a barrel of whiskey, went on to work with a life of the church, and becomes the Underground Railroad king. I mean, it's ridiculous, but you did what you had to do. And not only recognizing his contributions, but he left a legacy with his children in education and the arts, which is just amazing. And Jonathan Jasper Wright, I had read a little bit about that, but to become a Supreme Court justice in South Carolina, irony there, but at age 30, has got to say about your level of being an orator, and your dedication to justice, and then later his dedication to education. What amazing man. And you kind of pulled it all together with your last quote that no matter your politics or your color or anything, it's about the integrity of the human being. And what amazing examples of folks from Susquehanna County. So, I think that their lives are an inspiration to so many to persevere and to use whatever opportunities that you can get to do good. So thank you. Cindy and Sherman, we want to thank you not only for bringing the stories of these Black men to light, but all the work that you've done to educate so many of us about the other Black residents of Susquehanna County. This has been a fascinating presentation. On an aside, I do want to thank Heather Lord of the Susquehanna County Historical Society and Free Library Association for her technical assistance today. We would not have been able to do this without her. This event has been recorded, so as many of you will be seeing shortly, it will be featured on YouTube. And the Historical Society invites you to further explore the history of Susquehanna County and the Black residents of Susquehanna County. We do have some collection of work about them and maybe about your own family history. So you're certainly welcome to visit the Society's museum, which is on our second floor that you can access by elevator. Fascinating museum. And also our research room downstairs. Our hours for research and free tours in the museum are available on our website and Facebook page, as is a great deal of information about the county's history. So I hope you will check out those two locations. Again, from the Susquehanna County Historical Society and Free Library Association, thank you for joining us for this presentation, and best wishes.